Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to deal with a poem entitled About My Race, a song written by Poykayil Appachan, a Dalit revolutionary leader and a social reformer. When we try to place Poykayil Appachan in the history of Kerala Renaissance, we can place him along with the social reformers like Sri Narayana Guru, Sahodaran Ayyappan, and Chattapi Swamigal and Chavarachan. All these eminent and acclaimed personalities laid the foundation of modern Kerala. They contributed to the general spirit of liberation. Poikayil Appachan belongs to the Dalit community who were culturally, socially and economically marginalized and were pushed away from the mainstream society. They were denied even the basic human rights over their own land. They were discriminated, subjugated and exploited by the people belonging to the upper class and caste of the society. Poikayil Appachan, who was also known as Sri Kumara Gurudevan, was born in central Travancore in 1879 to parents who were slaves to an affluent Christian landowning family. He had to suffer the agonies and distress of slavery and discrimination even at a very young age. However, he was fortunate enough to receive basic education and was exposed to the world of knowledge. He was introduced to the Malayalam alphabet and stories from the Bible. He tried to pass on his knowledge to others and to uplift their spirits. He used carefully crafted songs and spirituals for organizing people for their liberation and social emancipation. He was a social reformer and a Dalit activist, a very good orator and a singer. Now here, Poykayil Appachan uses the medium of poetry in order to mark the harsh realities the Dalits had to suffer as a marginalized community. He created a subaltern space and worked hard to democratize the society where each and every citizen can enjoy equal rights and lead a liberated life. He was nominated to the Travancore Srimulam Prajasabha twice, first in 1921 and again in 1931. And he initiated many legislative forms for his people and similar depressed social sections. Now, Dalit poetry evokes a sense of rebellious spirit among the marginalized sections to retaliate against the oppression that they had to face over the centuries based on caste, color, and economic standards. The discrimination faced by the marginalized community triggered him to form an organization named Pratyaksha Raksha Deva Sabha in 1910, which encompassed all sections of Dalits across subcaste divisions. He was also a member of the Sadhu Jana Paliparana Sangam, which was founded by Ayyangali. Poykayil Appachan expresses his anguish and discontent at the absence of written history about his race. He could find plenty of histories about the privileged races. He points out that the lives of the marginalized communities are excluded completely from the mainstream writings. So, the poet decides to write about his race in his own tone. He recited this poem that we are going to study today at the Legislative Assembly of Thiruvananthapuram in 1921. This poem, which was originally written in Malayalam, was translated into English by Jessica Sudhir M. Okay, now let's look into the poem. The poem begins like this. Not a single word about my race is seen, but of other races I see histories in plenty. Poykayil Appachan observes that Not a single word about the life and history of the Dalits were written in the history. There was no one to record the history of his race. This draws our attention to a very serious problem, the problem of illiteracy and ignorance of the Dalits. The Dalits were purposely deprived of education so as to retain them in the lowest strata of the society, where they could be exploited and used as mere tools or slaves to satisfy the needs of the upper class. They could be used to till their land, to do the cultivation, do the cleaning, and to do all the manual labor and menial jobs. On the other side, the affluent and the rich enjoyed a life of luxury at the expense of the poor Dalits. Nobody wrote about the Dalits, but there were plenty of writings about the life and history of the privileged races in the society. Now, the second stanza goes like this. Histories in this world, each of them conceives two races, but then not a single word about my race. Histories can conceive or think about only the major races on the earth. Only the privileged sections are given space in the history, and not a single word is written about his race, that is, the Dalits. Appachan uses the plural term histories to denote the existence of plural narratives. The two races mentioned can be a reference to the Hindus and the Christians, or any of the two dominant religions of the time. Poykayil Appachan was born a Hindu, and he later converted himself to Christianity in order to escape the rigid casteism of the Hindu religion. But he could not find any difference in the Christian religion also. The marginalized sections are treated alike everywhere. They are always sidelined by the privileged sections. So now moving on to the third stanza. Alas, there was nobody here, no one at all in the past, to write the story of this race of mine. Now in this stanza too, he stresses the same point, that is, the gaps and absences in the history and the lack of history of his race. There was no one to write the history of the poet's race because the members of his race were the earliest inhabitants of this land, and they were denied opportunities to learn and acquire knowledge. They were always sidelined by the privileged sections of the society. Now, here he is saddened by this fact that his race was totally neglected by the history and the society. The thought grieves me, therefore let me add in my own tune a few notes. Here he is trying to fill up the blank spaces in history by adding his own notes about his race. He tries to reclaim its past and attempts to provide a space for the subaltern in the present and in the future. So he's trying to add a few notes in his own tune. And the next stanza is also a continuation of this. The fifth stanza goes like this. The story of how the earliest occupants came to be regarded as wretched in Keralam. Now here he's trying to write down the history of the earliest inhabitants, that is the Dalits, and how they came to be regarded as the wretched people or the unfortunate people in Kerala. He ponders upon this question, and by writing about his race, he wants to show how his community came to be considered as a cursed progeny and who actually were responsible for the current state of wretchedness of his race. The upper caste people, they constructed a hierarchy in which the Dalits were deprived of any position. They called them as wretched progeny. Now moving on to the 6th stanza. I am not ashamed to unveil the weaknesses of my race, forever called the cursed progeny. Now here he says he's not ashamed to unveil or reveal the weaknesses of his race, who are referred to as the cursed progeny or the cursed offspring. He plans to use all details of his race, openly stating all its weaknesses. Poykayil Appachan intends to deconstruct popular notions regarding the marginalized race. Thus, he wants to create an identity for his race. Once he finishes writing down their history, everyone will realize that the idea of cursed progeny is just a narrative or a construct of the upper class people in order to rule over them. Now moving on to the 7th stanza. All blame us without hesitations, and are they to blame us till this earth and sky perish? In fact, Dalits were the earliest occupants of Kerala, but unfortunately they have been sidelined throughout the ages, and they were considered as a wretched and cursed progeny. Appachan confides that he is not ashamed to explicitly showcase the weakness of his race. The dominant hegemonic group always blame the Dalit community, and Appachan's concern is expressed here when he says, are they to blame us till this earth and sky perish? And will this blame game continue forever? Now, towards the end of this poem, he talks about God. How can God, he who gave shape to all, allow this to go on? The poet wonders, how can God, the all-pervading power and the creator of all living beings, allow this kind of discrimination to go on? It is a vehement criticism against God. This poem is a plaintive outcry against the exploitation and the marginalization of the Dalits. I hope the poem is clear to you now. Now let's look at some of the questions. First question, what does the word in the opening of the poem represent? The word denotes the written words to represent the Dalits in history. It refers to the absence of history of his race. Second question, which is the race identified by Poykayil Appachan as my race? Answer, the Dalit is the race identified by Poykayil Appachan as my race. Third question, how does the histories in the world conceive humanity? Answer, the histories in the world conceive humanity as consisting of only two races. It can be a reference to the Hindus and the Christians or any of the two dominant religions of the time. Question number 4. What is the cause for the grief that the poet feels? Answer, the poet grieves over the fact that nobody wrote the history of his race. The history of the Dalits is not included in the mainstream writings. Question number 5. How does he attempt to overcome the feeling of grief? Answer, the poet attempts to overcome the feeling of grief by writing in his own tune a few notes about the story of his race. Question number 6. Who, according to the poet, are the earliest occupants of Keralam? Answer, his race, that is, the Dalits, are the earliest occupants of Keralam. Question number 7. What is the poet not ashamed of? The poet is not ashamed of talking about the weakness of his race. Question number 8. What does the word cursed progeny in the poem indicate? Answer. The word cursed progeny indicates that the members of the poet's race are always cursed and they are considered as the offspring of a wretched group of people. It shows how the upper class people look down upon the lower class people. Question number 9. What are the members of the poet's race blamed for? Answer. The members of the poet's race are blamed for being the descendants of a group of people who are cursed and deserved no respect as they belong to the lower class. Question number 10. What is the poet's question to God? Answer. The poet asks God how can he allow this caste discrimination to go on when God himself has created the whole universe. Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.